right, hi and welcome to the Skeptical Leftist Podcast, the show where I talk to a variety of people to spread critical thinking, progressive politics, and left-wing philosophy. And today I'm joined by Osita Nwanevu. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And I guess, first things first, we need to get a little bit of information about you.
Sure.
So who are you?
Sure. So I'm a contributing editor at the New Republic, a columnist at The Guardian. I'm also the Democratic Institutions Fellow at the Roosevelt Institute right now, where I've been writing about some of the stuff that I talk a little bit about in the book. But yeah, those are my main affiliations now, write about American politics and have been for about the last 9-10 years or so.
Okay, so you keep up pretty hardcore with the the party stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately. Unfortunately. Don't really enjoy it. Can't say I enjoy it much, but yeah, that is what I end up doing a lot of.
I'm sure as we go on, we'll end up talking about some of the stuff that's going on with the Democratic Party and
Totally.
And even the Republicans probably at some point.
Totally, yeah.
But you have a book coming out in August called The Right of the People. And in the pitch from Penguin Random House, I got the impression that this is a book that sort of says that America has not really ever really been like a democracy.
That's the argument. That's the provocation of the book. And it's one that I came to, as I said, I've been covering American politics for the last 10 years now. Democracy has always been one of the undercurrents, but, one of the signal moments, at least in my political thinking, was the 2016 election, where we saw Donald Trump come into office despite most Americans not voting for him, despite losing the popular vote. That's the second time in the last 25 years this has happened. I distinctly remember being in second grade in 2000 and absorbing the 2000 election, not really understanding what was going on exactly, but knowing people were mad. And knowing people were mad because Bush had been elected without winning the popular vote.
Right.
There was like a basic level of unfairness about that I perceived even as a kid. And I guess I've just carried that with me my entire life so far. So I've always been, wondering about this question, how democratic is our system actually? And I think that the events of the last 10 years especially have made this a really, really important question to confront directly.
Yeah, I guess one could say there was lots of people who considered even the Democratic primaries when Bernie was running not to be a fair primary and not to be democratic in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, it all comes down to what you think democracy is all about. I mean, I remember, in 2020, and people were talking about the 2020 primary this past year, 2024, as this kind of democratic process. Well, it was a primary. People went out and voted. Well, depending on what state you lived in, you might not have gotten to vote really in a meaningful way at all in the election, right? And so this gets at one of the key things I'm trying to do with this book, which is when we say democracy or we say that the system is democratic, we say an election is democratic and so on, what does that actually mean? When we say that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, what are the kinds of things that are at stake in these politics? Now, we say that he's attacking our democracy, our constitution. What is the actual democratic character of those things, if it's real at all? And I think this is an important time to confront these things, not because, we're in a place where they're substantively being brought up to us. These issues are in our faces. But they were also in a time when a lot of Americans doubt the democratic character of the system themselves. Yeah. I think there are a lot of people who went into this last election who heard Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and the rest of the Democratic Party saying, no, Donald Trump is a threat to our democracy. I think there are people who thought back to themselves, well, as far as I can tell, the rich people win out in Washington, the corporations win in Washington. What democracy is there to save? Like, what's actually at stake here? Maybe I should be voting on the basis of how much groceries cost, how much rent is going to be next month. And this hope, and I think it was a mistaken and misguided hope, but this hope that Donald Trump would improve the economic situation. Right. So there's I think, a lack of resonance that the Democratic message, both big D and small d, has had for most voters. And I think that's all the more reason to really explore seriously what democracy means. Because if we're not in a position to defend democracy and define it, if we're not in a position to define democracy, I think we'll be hard-pressed to defend it from people who are attacking it and from the authoritarians we really do have in our politics today.
Yeah, I seem to recall, even as far back as something like 2009, 2008, somewhere in there was like a lot of talk about getting money out of politics and the attempt to get money out of politics and remove lobbying. And then, of course, I can't remember the name of what the act was, but then it or the event or whatever where it was called. But like, so citizens eventually had free like speech because they could vote with their dollars, and that gave them essentially more power to vote than citizens.
Yeah. Citizens United, big, right. Consequential ruling at the Supreme Court, fundamentally transformed American politics. I mean, I think it was already the case before that the wealthy corporations got their way in D.C., but opening the floodgates to have basically unlimited amounts of money being raised for political campaigns, for elections. We've seen the impact of that in the last decade or so, especially. And so I think that's worth confronting. And it's one of the reasons, again, why I think that most Americans, even if they don't know, all the laws involved, even if they don't know about that ruling, there is this perceived sense that the people who go in to work in Washington, D.C. as the people's representatives haven't been doing anything from their perspective on their behalf. And so why not consider somebody like Donald Trump, who is actually going to attack those institutions, right? So I think that, again, we're in a place where if we really care about democracy, and I make the case in this book that we should, in fact, we should have a more radical and expansive conception of what democracy means. But getting there means that we have to have a picture of democracy representing the people that isn't just, your civics teacher told you in high school or grade school that our system, the founders created, was a democratic system and we're supposed to venerate it and protect it and not change anything about it. That's not going to cut it, I think, anymore, substantively. And I think it's not going to be a message, as we saw this last election, that resonates with many Americans.
Yeah, it's, I guess you hear about it a lot on like the far left, which is where I generally am. The material conditions that people experience affects them, the way they view the political structure of their country. And when you're suffering, when you're poor, when you can't buy food or have to work 3 jobs, you don't see things as equal or democratic or right in any sense.
100%. And so this is one of the reasons why in this book, I talk about some of the basic political reforms people have been talking about for years. Dealing with the Electoral College, dealing with the Senate, dealing with gerrymandering, these kinds of things, I think are all really, really important. But I think, if I could isolate one thing in the book that I think is going to be new to most people's ears, that I think is really important to focus on, it's a concept of economic democracy, right? Okay. So if democracy is a system that we desire because it gives us a measure of control over the conditions that shape our lives, that's why it's important to have, a free access to the ballot. I think we should consider why those values also shouldn't apply to the economy, including our very workplaces. Right? We spend a third of our lives at work. We derive our livelihoods from work. The decisions being made at the top of corporations often affect us more directly, intimately, immediately than decisions being made in Washington, D.C., even, or in our state houses, our state capitals. Then we tell ourselves we're not entitled to any kind of democratic voice or democratic say. And that should be strange to us. It should be strange to us that if you are a worker at Amazon or at Walmart or McDonald's, you can go and vote in an election. And I think this is right and good. You can vote in an election about our foreign policy when it comes to Russia or Iran, right? But there's nowhere where you can say, this is how I think McDonald's should work. This is how I think Amazon should work. Right. This is how I think Walmart should work. Except working through or trying to work through a political system to regulate those companies that their bosses also have more of a say in than they do. So there's a fundamental democratic issue here. I think democratic theorists have approached this question for a lot of years, but it's not a mainstream discussion. Right. But I think it ought to be on a level of basic principle. And I spend a lot of the book arguing that should be the case.
I wonder if sometimes it's because of the way that it gets framed. Because what you're describing, like worker co-ops do that. I mean,
exactly.
Far left people like myself, we call that socialism.
Right.
But I know that your mainstream politics in America will never accept something that's called socialism.
Well, I think the way you can talk about it is this is democracy. I think it's all of the same thing. If you are angry about Donald Trump because you think authoritarianism is wrong, it is wrong for somebody who is more wealthy and powerful than you are to try and dictate the conditions of your life, to sort of live beyond the bounds of the law. I think that should make you angry. I think it should make you angry too that every day at work, people are existing within functionally authoritarian situations. where they don't have a say, that their bosses can tell them, you don't get to use the bathroom. You don't get to talk to your coworkers in a particular way. They can steal your wages. Like all of these things can be framed to me. Even if you've never read Marx, even if you don't consider yourself a leftist, whatever, I think there's like a basic democratic intuition here that should tell us that these are real problems that we're obligated to solve as a society.
Yeah, for sure. I guess, it is about how you frame it, for sure. Like maybe don't using buzzwords or what have you isn't the best way to approach these things, but definitely through the lens of democracy, I think, or like a lot of people that I've talked to do understand that like they should have a say at their workplace. And as long as you word it correctly, they can often agree that they should have a higher percentage of the profits, as it were.
Totally. In fact, I've looked at polling on this question. So I think the Democracy Collaborative and YouGov polled this, I want to say in 2018, 2019, where they asked straight up, if we had a policy where companies of a certain size had to give over 20%, 30%, 40%, up to 50% of their shares over to their workers in a kind of democratic fund, would you support that? Huge amounts of support, all the way up to 50%.
Yeah.
Right? Because people aren't thinking of it as leftism. There's a basic intuition. Well, hell, I work at this company. I make what this company does possible. I am the actual labor force here. Of course, I'm entitled to something, whether that's a say or up to an ownership stake in the company. It shouldn't be left to executives and investors on Wall Street who haven't done anything to build this business. Why don't I get some of that? I think you can frame all of that, again, from a basic perspective of democratic intuition. And so I talk about Bernie Sanders' plan in 2020, which I think was one of the most extraordinary economic proposals anyone's ever put forward in mainstream American politics. Got basically no attention whatsoever for I think a lot of interesting reasons. But he said companies of a certain size, I think if you were traded in the public markets, or if you have 100 million at least on your balance sheet, you'd be required over time to gradually put 20% of your shares as a company into a fund that would be functionally owned and controlled by workers, right? And so the workers get a dividend from that. They'd also get some voting rights on the basis of that. This kind of measure of democracy that, it's 20%. It's not 51%. It's not 60%. That would be a real economic transformation in this country. I don't think there's anything like that exists in the world today. As much as we have things like codetermination and other labor policies we should draw from, that would have been a really radical and new and I think positive thing to have happen. And so I reintroduced that idea in the book, again, as democracy. There's a basic democratic intuition there. And I think it's time for us to stop thinking that the political sphere and the economic sphere exist separately. They're intertwined in fundamental ways. And as long as we delude ourselves and tell ourselves that that's not true, we're going to be prevented from solving the big challenges we have to solve in this country.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, how this intersects with have you, I guess, has this question been brought up in terms of union participation? Like, is there a crossover there?
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about just the bare need to expand labor power through traditional unions as well. I mean, there's a whole gamut of proposals from, we need to pass the PRO Act, we need to do card check, all the way up to the Bernie Sanders thing. Every stop in between of labor policy that I could get to and fit in was in there, because I do think that, again, these are the real ways that we instantiate worker power, democratic power for ordinary people in this country and in any economy. It's important to have the right to vote. It's important to have equal participation in the political system. But we know, too, now, and we can see now, that we have a system that's dominated by the wealthy and the powerful, partially because they use the resources that they have made themselves exclusively entitled to in the economy, and they use that to influence the political system. We just saw over the last couple of months, the wealthiest person on earth, because he was able to donate $250 million, $260 million to Donald Trump's campaign, basically purchased himself a post in government. Right. And began firing fellow workers, reworking the federal administrative state. Yeah. Like a princeling, right? That should tell us something. I don't know that there's a more direct example of how you can't cleave off the economy as a separate thing than what Elon Musk did. Right. We're on the cusp of, in a few years, probably having the first trillionaires come to the economy. This is real. I don't think that we can have hope of democratic society prevailing when there are such deep concentrations of power among so few people in our society. And it's time for us to wake up to that fact. And I think that rebuilding labor power has to be part of the solution.
So I guess the question is, how do you achieve this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it seems like both political parties that are dominant in the United States are resistant to any kind of like change.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's like a chicken or egg problem, So you need, I think, in many cases, to pass legislation to make it easier to organize, to defend the rights of workers, and so on. Why can't you pass that legislation? Because workers are not powerful.
Right.
So how is it's this catch-22 situation that I, in this book, don't really fully resolve. But I do think that people need to invest in labor organizing, traditional labor organizing. They need to be going to their state and local governments, from my perspective, and seeing what can be done there to expand labor rights. We have this federal preemption of labor law in this country, I think, is a huge obstacle to getting ambitious things done. What can we do to kind of crack through that? Maybe even, frankly, break away from that, ignore that in places where we can, to really expand the power of workers on the ground. That's going to be really important. It's great that state constitutions are actually much easier to amend than the federal constitution. You can put things about worker rights right in there in state constitutions potentially. People have already amended them for education and other issues. I think that labor rights should be front and center what we amend state constitutions for. So there's a lot of different things to try out and as a logistical matter. And, I'm not a strategist. I'm not an organizer. I leave that kind of thing to the experts. But what I will say is somebody who writes and somebody who talks about national political narratives and political messages. We need to bring people who, again, are rightfully outraged about Donald Trump, rightfully incensed about the right to vote being taken away by Republicans, rightfully, energized and actually working on those issues in the Democratic Party, to say to themselves, you know what, democracy means a whole lot of other things too. It means that people have basic entitlements in the economy. And in fact, if we don't address those things, all of the political goals that we have aren't going to pass. They're not going to succeed unless we radically expand the power of the American worker. If you can pull people who watch like MSNBC, people who engage with that level, you pull them in this direction on the basis of caring about democracy, I think we can do a lot. I think we can craft a kind of coherent agenda that unites both the political reforms and the labor reforms that the left has been working towards. And I think that'll be a really powerful thing, especially at a moment where people are asking themselves, what is the future of the Democratic Party? What's the vision? Is it, zoning policy or something like that? Like what is the actual thing we're going to sell to people at a moment where, I think the approval of the Democratic Party is in like the 30s or something right now. Like what actually fills in that gap? And how do you speak to people, especially who don't trust the institutions, who don't think the system works, who don't see any reason why they should believe in it or why they should reject Donald Trump on that basis? Framing democracy as, again, not this kind of dusty old thing that they did in 1787 that you have to respect and defend, but this collective project of creating a better society across all fronts, including in ways that directly impact the material lives. That, I think, is really powerful. That's something I think they could work with. And it feels like, when you're involved in a project like that, it gives you meaning. It gives you purpose. It gives you a vision of a better world to work towards. It's not just a defensive thing.
Right.
And so this is a long-winded way of saying, I think that there are ways you can build a coalition around this, right? People who are incensed, outraged about political democracy, right? People on the left who have been fighting for economic power for workers. And then this kind of outer group, not really political, not really sure where they are, but doesn't like the institutions, hates the institutions, right? You can bring these people together, I think, under the Democratic banner in a really powerful way. And I think that's worth trying.
I'm not a person who has a lot of faith in institutions.
Right. And you shouldn't. Especially these ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like it could be a hard sell, but if you frame it right, I suppose you could at least bring people together enough to be like, okay, well, let's try some new things.
Yeah. That's the hope. And that's why I use the language of a new founding, right? So what I'm arguing for in the very long run is we need a new constitutional arrangement, whether that's a new written constitution or a new constitutional order that isn't written in the next decades ahead. That's the kind of North Star we need to be moving towards, gradually building up towards by reforming democracy in the ways we can now, building consensus, building support for the larger changes that I think are necessary in the future. Um, Again, I think that there's something really powerful, at least to me, about having a kind of horizon,
Sure.
about being part of a constructive project. Um, and one that I think, again, has real connections to improving people's material lives in the present, too.
Yeah, I guess I get stuck because I have invested a lot of my own thoughts and projects and just my general philosophy in like mutual aid projects
Yeah,
outside of the system
yeah,
in a sense, right? And so I guess how can you I guess I'm curious if there's a way to make people like me, kind of come back into the system a little bit, or is it fine to leave like your anarchists and your communists out of the discussion a little bit and focus on your floaters who might not know that much about labor theory or whatnot.
No, I mean, I think it takes all kinds, right? I think there are people who aren't comfortable working within the system, who aren't, who don't feel that that's suited to doing it. They should continue doing the important work that they're doing, whether that's mutual aid, labor organizing, other kinds of organizing. 100%. I think that should continue. Then there are people like me who, like wearing ties and this kind of thing, and we're gonna be arguing for electoral reform as least as we can. I see that all as part of the same kind of driving force. We don't necessarily all have the same end state. We
Right.
do know what's exists now is
Yeah.
untenable and
Right.
unjust and not right. We do, I think, all want to move in a more democratic direction. We do kind of all agree that the Senate sucks. We do all
Yeah.
kind of agree that workers deserve more power. So this is a lot to work with, I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
from my perspective. And I think there are different ways you can be involved in that shared project. There are different levels at which you can engage. But I think it takes all kinds and it takes all comers to really build a movement for this stuff.
I know I talked to a guy who I guess he would have called himself a Democrat at the time, and I think he still does. But his thing was like he'll work with anyone who will work with him.
Yes,
so
100%.
it's one of those things like yeah, if we have we're both pushing against the rise of far right ideologies.
Yeah.
Then we're on the same page, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. And I think, I think that just fighting fascism is a wonderful thing to unite behind.
Yeah.
But I think it has to be done with, I think the thing that distinguishes the kind of project I'm talking about from the kind of anti-Trump project that we have is he's a bad guy, an evil person. Yes,
Right.
this movement, this particular formulation we have right now is deeply evil. It's destroying people's lives.
Yeah.
But there are deep roots for all this. There are deep sources of the power that Donald Trump is using at this particular political moment. That even if we get rid of Donald Trump, move beyond this particular political situation, we might find ourselves in the same place again or in a worse place
Right.
moving forward.
Yeah.
And so it has to be a kind of uniting against fascism that takes the root causes seriously, both in terms of our political structures and our economic structures, right? And again, for people who have kind of an apprehension or doubts about, the, the resistance as we've known it today, if we can say, look, we're not just here to get rid of this guy, we're here to really transform and revolutionize our whole political system entirely to make it more equitable. That's a different kind of message. It speaks at a different register to people. I feel like it's less staid. It's not the same thing you hear over and over again from cable news,
Right.
And I think that matters to people. I think that there's potential there.
Is there room in the Democratic Party for something like that, like a radical reimagining?
I certainly hope so, man. I certainly, I think that we just have an election in New York where we have a guy who's probably going to win openly as a
Right.
socialist in New York City, the seat of financial capital in the United States and frankly the world. That matters tremendously.
Yeah.
I think there are places where you can work outside the two-party system for sure across this country. I also think though that for really boring and complicated and technical reasons, we have the duopoly we have
Right.
that's really entrenched itself over hundreds of years. And, to the extent that we can find ways to utilize that, harness that to our ends as leftists, I think we should be trying our best. And I think that there's reason for hope. I mean, the total lack of faith, the total lack of confidence most ordinary Democratic voters have about the party right now is a source of opportunity. People are really looking, grasping, desperate for vision, for direction. And I think that we are well positioned as a movement to offer it. If we make the right pitch, if we're creative about how we talk to people, I think there's real potential there, because I think that there's recognition, even amongst people who consider themselves committed Democrats, that things cannot go on the way that they've been gone on.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hopeful that you're right.
I am too. I might be totally wrong.
Like I said, when we first connected, I was reading your article from The Guardian, your recent from the July 18th article. And you have, who is it? John McCormick, who called the party's brand toxic and weak and woke. Yeah. And I wonder, isn't that just a right winger in this party that you're trying to turn into a leftish party? And is that kind of attitude going to stop any movement in its tracks?
People are going to try. I think there's going to be a real fight in the next couple of years as we move into 2028 over where this party is going. But I think it's a fight that people on the left, again, I think can potentially win. If I'm wrong, I'll have been wrong. But I think this is a fight that's worth having. The way that I think about this is, I also write a lot about the right and the conservative movement. I think it's important to remember that there's a time in American politics when the conservative movement was a minority faction, right? There was this kind of consensus around the New Deal, consensus around government intervention. People take for granted in the 40s and the 50s into the 60s. Well, hell, this is the government we have. We accept that the government has a role to play in shaping the economy. We accept that labor is important and ought to be respected. And that's just the way America is now. Right. And the conservatives, this kind of motley crew of kooks finally managed in the 50s and 60s kind of organize themselves to be in a position to try to take over the Republican Party. People like Rick Perlstein read about this. I just finished a review of Sam Tannenhaus's biography of William F. Buckley. It gets into some of this, right? 64, they succeed in getting a nominee, Barry Goldwater, who is completely and totally destroyed. I mean, absolutely demolished in the general election. Would have been very easy for them to say, well, hell, that means that the status quo, the conventional wisdom is right. We are in a New Deal society. That's just the way things are going to be. But they kept at it. They spent years and years and years going into communities, building civic organizations, building different pressure campaigns, starting magazines and think tanks and so on, to get people to understand or to cotton to their view of society. Yeah. By 1980, we have Ronald Reagan. Now, there was a lot of money, obviously, from wealthy people that funded all of that stuff. But I do think that's kind of the place where the left is today. We have a status quo that takes for granted that we have no future in American politics. Neither of the two parties is really hospitable to us. Kind of the Democratic Party, there are things we can do, but it doesn't seem very easy right now to crack in. But I don't think that means that there's not a future in electoral politics. I think it means that we have a lot of movement building to do to bring people over to our side who aren't there already. And again, I think that means being creative about the way we talk to people about the issues, the language we use, the rhetoric we use, the vision that we're laying out there. If we work at that and work to bring in people who, maybe are just kind of like casual Democrats who have some of the right feelings but aren't all the way there yet, I think there's a lot to work with. Bernie Sanders remains the most popular politician in the United States last time I checked. Right. That means something,
Yeah. I often think of because Medicare for all was pretty popular as an idea, right? There's a lot of these ideas that, say, if you just even Obamacare, when people heard the real name, they were on board more.
Right.
So yeah, it's largely a naming or word game, I think sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. The potential election of Zoran in New York definitely gives you some hope that there's potential good stuff coming in the future. I know. Is there a way to appeal to some of the Republicans without turning to the right? Like, can you appeal to them on material basis? Or are they just so stuck in like the grievance politics that you can't appeal to them?
So people who have been voting Republican for years and years, who consider themselves kind of like hardcore members of the conservative movement, I don't think you actually have a way of appealing to. I think if there's like a hard ideology there, it's difficult to crack. I don't think you can crack it on the basis of reason, the basis of argument. There's a lot of things going on there. People who in the last couple of elections since 2016 have kind of like drifted over to the right, who have like looser political ideas, looser political affiliations, people in the working class, young men, people are talking about a lot right now, but, a broader section of Americans, including, I think it's important to remember in this last election, Trump improved his numbers with black voters, Hispanic voters, all kinds of people were curious about him, but are not like Republicans, rock solid.
Right.
Those people, absolutely 100% we can appeal to and try to win over on the basis of material appeals, but also on the basis of real political vision. So not just, we're going to reduce the price of prescription drugs by, X%, and we're going to do tax credit for this, but like a real robust, we are going to create more egalitarian democratic society that more directly empowers you every single day you go to work, that delivers more for you as a worker every single day you go in. Like a structural, fundamental change to the economy and the way it works and who gets to direct it. That, I think, is a message that people aren't used to hearing. And I think it's a message that could resonate. Even for people, and this is something I actually think is worth saying too. I think there's a way in which policies like Medicare for All or all the social democratic things that people have put forward in American politics as progressives, there's a resistance to them from a lot of people because I think they see them as, well, you're taking money from me to give it off to some less fortunate person.
Right.
Right? That's always been, I think, a real challenge for the left. How do you get people to be more pro-social or more capacious in their understanding of how these policies benefit society? I think that's going to remain an ongoing challenge. I don't have like the magic key solution. But the politics of labor has a way potentially of resonating with every single person who goes to work, which is most people. Right?
Yeah.
So it's not you are involved in left politics because there is some poor person or some minority or some other group that you were being asked to do something for, although I think we should continue pushing people to do that. We say, look, okay, let's say you don't like those things. Your boss shouldn't be able to fire you arbitrarily. You are entitled to a workplace where you know your wages aren't going to get stolen. Yeah. You're entitled to leave. You're entitled to have a way to voice complaints about your working conditions. You're entitled, in fact, to a real share of stock in the company you work for because you're the one who makes the company, damn it. That is a completely different register, I think, that people are used to hearing from left politics, most left politicians. And I think it's something that's worth a try. I don't know what will come out of focusing or foregrounding that, but I think it would sound novel to people. It sounds like something different from politics in the way they're used to it.
Yeah. I was thinking a little bit while you were talking. I just recently talked to a friend of mine who lives in North Dakota, and he's also a poet, and he wrote this poem about like how willing he is to be taxed more if it helps this person and that person and teachers and I wish there was a way. I mean, because people are so self-interested, and we've also been indoctrinated into this kind of hyper-individualist kind of mentality. It's really hard to get people to grab onto that kind of like, I will give of myself for the well-being of others.
Yeah.
But yet, like Donald Trump and the elite kind of rich people that he supports also seem to have a requirement that everybody sacrifices, but now it's in the name of like them getting more rich.
Right. No, I think that's totally true. I mean, I think to the extent that I have any ideas about making people like more pro-social, I think one of the great tools for doing that is labor, is being in a union, being in some kind of work structure, right? So people might join these for self-interested reasons. I'm getting ripped off at work and so on. But once you put people together in a group, they're talking to each other about their problems, you're encountering people who are different from you and learning how to interact with that person and so on, realizing you have common interests. I think that then hopefully becomes the basis upon which you can build more support for social democratic policies, right? People come to understand themselves as a class through these infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
This is why unions, I think, were so instrumental in building building the great society, supporting these kinds of programs. I think we only kind of get back there by doing the hard work of building a labor base in the first place, which is why I think the economic democracy piece of what I'm talking about is so important.
Yeah, really got to build up that like you say, that labor power first, in a sense, right? Like, and yeah, because you even see it on picket lines and stuff where people, like, they may not be politically aligned, or some people might have pretty grievous or pretty bad attitudes about certain topics.
Yeah.
But, like, they hate their boss together.
100%. 100%.
I even see this at my own job.
Yeah, 100%. So I think we can harness that. We can utilize that. And again, I think this is a democratic question. The other thing that I think people should take an interest in, and this is for people who aren't necessarily on the left, but like who are concerned about democracy and the health of democracy, health of our institutions. One of the other things that labor does is it allows us to practice some of the skills that we need, I think, to make democracy work, right? So you're coming together with people, you're developing your ability to talk to other people about problems, hear from other people, learn how to compromise, learn how to work together, and so on. If these are things that we only do every 2 to 4 years at best when we participate in politics, those skills, which I think are essential to democracy, are not going to develop very well.
Yeah.
But if people are doing them like every day or every week or on a regular basis at work, I think you then build certain capacities to participate in democracy that actually contribute to the health of our politics, right?
Yeah.
And so if you are one of these, like, centrists, we're mean to each other, we hate polarization, so on, this kind of thing, how do we solve that? I think labor unions, labor power, actually offers us one of the powerful mechanisms to start combating some of that stuff as well.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I know, like, I got called a weirdo because I listen to political podcasts, and I watch, like, on YouTube, I watch city council meetings and stuff.
Yeah.
And I participate, not just in my own organized, groups that I'm with, but also, like, I participate in the system as it exists in a variety of ways. And people generally think that's pretty strange and hard to grab onto.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is strange. I think it is. I mean, those of us who are really deeply, deeply engaged with politics are deeply, deeply unusual people.
Yeah.
And, if we want to live in a democratic society, some of that has to, I don't want to live, I'm not advocating for a world. I hope we don't get into a world where everybody's in a meeting all the time, every evening. They're all done at City Hall doing whatever. That's not my vision of what democracy has to mean or should mean. But I do think there are things we can do to give people more places where they can participate if they'd like to, and participate meaningfully, right?
Yeah.
And so I talk about deliberative assemblies, for instance, when it comes to politics. So these forums where you get, like, a randomly selected group of people come together in a room, consider a question, they'll hear from experts, they'll debate amongst themselves, and they'll have their kind of say. That could be an avenue for direct participation that we don't have today across most of our politics that's worth considering. I think we should be making it easier for ordinary people to run for office if they'd like to, starting with eliminating some of the ridiculous barriers we have, whether it's, the barriers on immigrants running for all offices they'd like to, or barriers people on the basis of age. That ought to fundamentally change. So yeah, I mean, I think that there are ways in which, politics can become more accessible to people and should be more accessible to people without us believing that, everybody always has to spend their precious time in the evening, and engage in some political discussion, watching hearings on their own time. I would not wish that upon anybody who doesn't want to participate. But it's important that those kinds of things exist for people, I think.
Yeah. I would never say, like, okay, so I haven't said it throughout this yet, but I am an anarchist.
Yeah.
So I am kind of like anti-state, but very pro participation and very pro, like, yes, I think people should be in more meetings and sacrifice some of their free time for that.
Yeah.
but not to the detriment of, like, life, right? Like,
sure,
you still have to live.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think by and large, I see what you're saying here as, like, a positive movement for sure.
Yeah.
I'm really, I mean, the more you can increase democracy at the workplace, the more you can get the existing status quo to move to a pro-labor, pro-work, pro-people stance. the better off everybody's going to be.
Yeah, I certainly think that's the case. And again, if we have any hope of defeating fascism, this looming crisis that people rightly perceive now, which I think is bad for everybody on the left and bad for the country as a whole, you don't get there without fundamentally reworking our political and economic institutions, period. And the longer that we delay in doing that, addressing that, confronting that, the more difficult it is for people on the left to organize, more difficult it's going to be for people who are struggling to live safely in their own communities. And so there's a real urgency to the discussion. I hope it doesn't come off as being too academic or too being
I don't think
too loose and confined this night. But I think that we've talked about democracy in our politics too loosely for too long, and that's I think the most important thing I have to say in this book. There's a real material force and weight to it as a system of ideas, and there are real obligations it confers upon us to change the system that we have.
I know, the majority of people that I know are deeply cynical about the idea of like getting another email from the Democratic Party saying they're fighting fascism or they're protecting democracy.
Because they're not.
So it'd be nice if there was like a vision for real democracy. Yeah, for sure. I guess one of the things that I guess I'm left with is because a lot of the people that I agree with on 99% of things get hung up on, they'll have one issue that they cannot ethically budge on.
Yeah.
And unless they can get the support from, say, or unless they can get the right, I guess, rhetoric or right action from a political party, they cannot make themselves support that party.
Yeah.
So I guess this is the sticking point, I guess, for me, is like somebody, say, who's like pro-Palestine or working towards that. Like, how do we get politicians to actually take an action or say something that will appeal to those people in order to get them on board with, say, like the labor movement? Because I know a lot of the labor movement is kind of divided on this too, right? Like
on Palestine specifically.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the first thing you do is you keep having your voice heard. I mean, people I think have been engaged in some debate over the last couple of days about were the protests effective, were they not effective, that students went out there and did. To my mind, we have had a tremendous fall in support for the Israeli regime and this war over the course of the last couple of years. Some of that is attributable, sure, to people just seeing the pictures in the news and being aware of what's going on. But the extent to which people are now willing to say genocide, even amongst the general American public, I think that is directly attributable to the activism that people did. I don't think that people necessarily would have seen things in the news and said, well, this is a genocide that's happening. We said it's really bad. We need to stop it. But the actual language and rhetoric where we say this is a genocide that's happening, this is an attempt to eliminate a people in a meaningful way, that is, to my mind at least, directly attributable to all of the work people did in making that point when nobody else in the media would, nobody else in the establishment would, right? And so what I would say is, the public is already moving in this direction. Keep at it. Right. And because politicians are self-interested, because they look out for their own, they try to do what they can to get elected and to protect their own careers. At some point, when people are mobilized enough, I think they have to respond. That's at least my hope. And I think that one of the reasons why Mamdani's win in New York, or likely win, I should say, winning the Democratic primary at the very least in New York, is so powerful, is that he rejected the entire schema people were trying to force him into on Palestine. Was really, really direct in saying what was going on was wrong, that it was genocidal, that defended people's right to speak out about it directly and openly and with candor. And the Democratic electorate in the city agreed with him overwhelmingly, or at least voted for him overwhelmingly on that basis. Ordinary, dyed-in-the-wool Democrats chose this guy. That should tell us something, and that should give people hope. So I don't blame people one iota for looking at the Democratic Party, looking at its ability in its support for this genocide back through the Biden administration, and saying to themselves, I can't support a party that would do this, that would abet this, that would allow this to continue. I think that is completely correct. And I think that the way to really continue the process of pulling people in our direction is to keep speaking out.
Right.
Keep being active. Keep being adamant about the injustice of what's happening and make sure it's remains in front of people's eyes.
Good answer. I think that's probably about as good an answer as you can have on the topic of Palestine and the Democratic Party, because that is something that I know many people are stuck on and
100%.
they cannot. Yeah. I guess we're past our 45 minutes, but I just want to ask you again one last thing. I guess, so there's almost no chance that a third party is ever going to be able to do this mission, right? It's got to be the Democrats.
Well, I mean, it gets complicated. I mean, so one thing I will say here is this: there's a reform that I talk about in the book, which is a move to proportional representation in the House of Representatives. Right. So you can actually do some of this by legislation. If you change the vote in the way that I describe in the book, you open the door to third parties in Congress very, very quickly.
Right.
Now, the obvious hitch there is, well, you have to get the Democrats to support that, which will disempower them. But that's the easiest method I can sort of think of, and the most the thing that political scientists talk the most about in terms of what would it actually take to build a third party or to make one viable. It's proportional representation in the House. So fight for that, advocate for that in doing your work if you really care about this. Barring that, I think it's important to see the left, whatever part of the left you're on, again, as a movement that has different components, different features. The conservative movement, to draw the analogy again, is not just the Republican Party as an institution, right? There's this whole apparatus of things and institutions and people that influences, shapes, directs the Republican Party, but is not reducible, contained exclusively within it, right? That's how they took over the Republican Party.
Yeah.
The left, similarly, I think should see itself as a movement that exists well beyond the Democratic Party and well beyond, frankly, electoral politics.
Right.
And so that's what I would say. I don't know that I see a real vehicle beyond proportional representation of getting us to a viable national third party. Again, I think that there are absolutely places in this country, the most liberal, left-leaning parts of the country, where you can win on the third party ticket if you organize. As far as the country as a whole, I'm not really sure that's feasible or in the cards. But I don't think that should delimit us.
Right.
I mean, these parties, I think, are vehicles. They're tools. They're instruments. They're not things that we worship or we sort of have as a center of our politics. They're things they're vessels to be used, from my perspective.
Yeah.
By movements.
Yeah, I got to agree with that. It seems like, although apparently many people online do not agree with, they do want to worship the party,
and they do.
It's very strange to me, but it's one of those things, I guess.
Yeah. But I think things are changing. I think that apart from the people you read online, see online, on social media, again, a lot of real cynicism about the Democratic Party, both in the wider electorate and in the party itself. I think that has to produce change of some sort. Whether that's good change or bad change, things getting even worse or even always possible potentially. But I think that's a moment for us to take advantage of.
Yeah, because I was talking to a friend this morning actually, and he was talking about how he's down in Florida. And all he sees is, it seems like, maybe it's just the voices that he sees, but all he seems to see is like people who insist that you must always support the Democratic Party no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And then the party itself seems to be pulling farther and farther right because they want to appeal to like the Republican base or whatever.
Right. We got to change it. We got to counter message. We got to offer an alternative. And I think that's entirely possible. I mean, look, what are the visions on offer right now? You have the abundance thing, right, which I'm sure you've talked about or heard about. Whatever you think, literally whatever you think about zoning and eliminating regulatory bottlenecks, literally whatever position you take, that is not a political future. That is not a vision. That is not going to be the thing. That wraps some people who are skeptical of institutions. So out of like pure political self-interest, they've got to go somewhere else. And where else is there? The left is the only faction that's offering solutions adequate to the size of the problems we face as a country. The only one that's thinking broadly and ambitiously enough. The only one with the inherent anti-institutional, at least in its current conception, sensibility,
Right.
We're kind of, if people are serious, the only game in town. And
Yeah.
I don't know, we'll see if we can make something of that.
Yeah, that abundance thing is funny. It's like deregulation isn't going to help like your average person like afford bread easier.
Right.
Like it's just not a thing it'll put more money in the pockets of Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Like, but whatever. I guess that's the way some people want to go with it.
Right.
But I guess we should mention the book again.
Yeah.
It's The Right. Oh, sorry. I'll bring it up.
Sure.
And now I'll edit out my error. The Right of the People from Random House on August 12th.
That's right.
And I guess, it says here that you're talking about abolishing the Senate, scrapping the Electoral College, and shattering judicial supremacy.
Yeah, that's all part of it.
I can get on board with all of that.
It's all part of it, but also to emphasize one more time, we need to bring democracy into the economy. We need to bring democracy into our working lives. That is part of the political project. The political project, I don't think, actually happens unless we do some of that. And it's also good in its own right, in its own sake. I think from my perspective, we're democratically entitled to something in the workplace. And I think we ought to start making that argument really directly to people.
It's good that there is like a increase in interest in labor lately, like the last couple years anyway.
For sure. It's encouraging.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess besides that, where can people find you?
Oh, they can find me on social media. It's just my name, Osita Nwanevu, basically everywhere. First and last, no space. I write a newsletter at ositananevu.com. And I think those are the places. I write for all kinds of publications. You'll be able to read some excerpts from the book pretty soon, a couple of magazines. But
cool.
Yeah, find me online.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for yours.